But yeah, he says that I don't. So.
Good evening. We're going to go ahead and get started. Before I call the meeting to order, I want to announce that we have individuals attending remotely as well as on site. And all participants that are joining remotely or by phone should please mute your devices when not speaking to avoid background noise. During the meeting, make sure you announce yourself by name and title when you speak so that the public knows who's participating. This is critical given the number of remote participants and its current guidance from our Kansas Attorney General. Make sure you're speaking into a microphone to ensure your comments are heard and an accurate record is made. I will call the meeting to order and ask the clerk to announce the meeting and call the roll, please.
Good evening. You are hereby notified that I have called a special session of the Unified Government of Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas, to be conducted in a hybrid format on Thursday, November 16th, 2023 at 5 p.m. for a special session regarding an update on PlanKCK and an update on the redevelopment of 3 UG-owned sites at 18th and Quindaro, 4th and Minnesota, and the former Indian Springs Mall site. Roll call. Bynum.
Here.
Burrows.
Here.
Townsend, we have an absence memo. McKiernan.
Here.
Ramirez, we have an absence memo. Johnson, absence memo. Kane, absence memo. Markley. Here. Stites.
Here.
Davis.
Here.
Garner.
Thank you, clerk. This evening, we're going to hear a presentation from our Director of Urban Planning and Design regarding PlanKCK, as well as the 3 unified government-owned sites. I'll recognize our County Administrator, David Johnston, for any remarks you might want to make, and then our presentation.
Without further ado, I'm just going to recognize Gunnar Hand, our Director of Planning and Urban Design, that will take us through the review. So, Mr. Hand.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator, Commissioners, public. My name is Gunnar Hand. I'm the Director of Planning and Design for the Unified Government. We have a presentation tonight about the ongoing update to our citywide comprehensive plan, what we've been calling PlanKCK. As we've been going through this process over the last year, we've come to you on a couple occasions with some special sessions, really focused on different subject matters, as this is a truly comprehensive plan. Tonight, we wanted to sort of prep you all for the approval process as we enter that this month. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to the project manager for this initiative, Ms. Alyssa Marcy.
Thank you, Gunnar. Could we get the presentation up, please? Oh yeah, I forgot. I'm not the same height as Gunnar. That's right. But good evening. Happy Friday Eve. My name is Alyssa Marcy. I'm the long range planner, and I'm going to provide the update for tonight. I have a clicker. Okay. Before I get started, I just wanted to take my planner's hat off for a moment and speak to you as a neighbor. Throughout this past year, I've heard from thousands of residents about what frustrates them, about what keeps them up at night, about all the things that they wish to see change, right? And you do the very same thing in your job here. But I think it's important to recognize that while we acknowledge what's happened in the past, we cannot address the past unless we look towards the future and plan for the future. And PlanKCK is something that can do that for us. And again, this is a plan that was made with the community. And I think it's an important reminder that the community is not inanimate, right? There are places and spaces and roads and such, right? But the community is the people. And this is a plan that was made with those people. Okay, putting my planner's hat back on. So in a community that has so many needs, it's important to focus on our strengths. And I want to touch on one of those strengths. So we sent around a bilingual survey and we heard, we asked the question, what makes KCK unique? And more than half of our respondents said diversity, some version of diversity, right? Diversity of places, of food, of things to do, of history, arts, and so on. And so as we move towards, bettering our community and going through strategic initiatives, it's important that we not only celebrate this diversity, but we leverage it. So what is it? Again, you've heard me present on this a few times now. Some of you weren't able to make certain meetings, so I think part of this will be a little bit of a recap. So if we consider everything that we have to account for, have to manage, have to pay for, have to plan for to provide a livable, vibrant KCK, especially considering how constrained our resources are, we have to be strategic. So PlanKCK is a North Star that can pull all of the threads together. And it truly began with the GODOT Countywide Strategic Mobility Plan back in 2022. This was that very first thread that was adopted, and it serves now as the mobility chapter of PlanKCK. And then we started to layer on other threads, such as our economic development strategic plan, our historic preservation plan, and our housing strategy, as well as other initiatives that were outside of planning, like what's going on with the Community Health Improvement Plan and the Health Department, and what we heard from the community in the 2024 budget process. So all of these threads come together to make up PlanKCK, which is an umbrella that can help guide us when we make future decisions, when we update policies, when we pursue grant funding, and decision-making in a community with great needs and, varied interests is only made harder if we don't have a unified vision. So PlanKCK is an attempt to do that. I also want to note, though, that it is elastic. As we change, as we move forward, we can't predict what happens in the future, but PlanKCK is designed to be able to move and adapt to those changes. So PlanKCK has 10 elements and 4 lenses. And those 4 lenses are equity, access, health, and regeneration. I want to note that we did change sustainability to regeneration because it fits our community better, right? We don't want to just sustain where we're at. We want to heal, we want to grow, we want to adapt. And then just a little bit of context, again, just like GODOT is a comprehensive transportation strategy for area plans and corridor plans, PlanKCK is, again, it's comprehensive. It's going to be broad. It's not going to be as specific as a project in a neighborhood or, the design of a trail. So it's serving, again, as that umbrella. Given all of these elements, we had to design a really robust engagement process. So there were really 3 pieces to this approach. The first was speaking with UG leadership and staff, because again, not only are they experts in their fields, but they're also residents. Director Hand was able to have one-on-one conversations with every single department head. I think that's very significant. As he mentioned earlier, we came to you as many times as we could within this process to either talk about a specific element of PlanKCK or PlanKCK more broadly. We also hosted many events. Some of those events were element specific. Again, some of those were broad. And then lastly, we attended events because we heard from our community time and time again to meet them where they are. I just want to give you a few stats. So in total, we hosted or attended 120 events. Of those events, 30 were hosted by others that we attended. We had over 300 responses to our bilingual survey. We were also the front page of the UG Spotlight, which launched last month, which went to 66,000 households. I think that's a huge deal. And then as we've gone through this engagement process over the last 9 months or so, we accumulated a very long listserv from all the participants in the events. And what we heard broadly is that our community has a desire for rapid change. They want to change the trajectory of where we're headed right now. They want to be able to live affordably. They also want to have access to community assets, and all of those things again, point to this one main goal of Plan KCK, which is achieving community prosperity. I also want to mention, though, that even if we do change a little bit, this doesn't mean that, for example, we're going to completely change everything we do. So if the market wants development out west, the market's going to continue to do that, and that's okay. But we can also then add some intentional development, right? I think a great example of that is something you'll hear of later when Director Hand talks about what's going on with the RFP process, right? We chose a vacant lot downtown and it's going to be redeveloped. That's an example of addressing some of what we've heard in the community. So why do we need a comprehensive plan? Again, we need a North Star, right? It's really hard to make decisions when you hear a lot of competing interests, and especially hard to make decisions when you have an incredibly constrained budget, right? So we need something that unifies us, and we need something that points us in a strategic direction. Lastly, I'm going to take you through a handful of examples of the strategic initiatives that we've identified in Plan KCK. So just keep in mind that these are just a few of many, many action items that we have. And again, a strategic initiative, right, is a single effort that addresses many stated goals. So just a little background. I know you've all read the 188-page document by now. But again, Plan KCK, it's achieving community prosperity with 4 lenses. It has 10 elements. Plan KCK has a chapter for each element that has goals and strategies. And then it has an implementation chapter at the end that identifies all those action items and strategic initiatives. And don't think I forgot you, Commissioner Bynum. So you had asked me for some kind of guiding graphic, and I will admit this might be a little bit of a rough draft. But this graphic basically shows what I just described, right? If the goal is community prosperity, and we have these 10 elements that we're looking through, these 4 lenses, that is what we need to achieve over the time period of Plan KCK. Any suggestions, Commissioner Bynum? We'd be happy to hear them. Okay, so first, strategic initiative. We talked about this a little bit before, but investing in our K32 corridor, right? So this connects our downtown Bonner Springs all the way to our downtown KCK. And then it also has an opportunity to connect to things like the Northeast KCK Heritage Trail going up into our Northeast community. It has an opportunity to connect to our Levee Trail. And then it has an opportunity for those to connect to the Rock Island Bridge, right? So a lot of regional connectivity opportunities. So this is a mobility effort. This is an economic development effort. This is a regeneration effort, right? It's strategic. Next is leveraging the Rock Island Bridge. And, you know, this is a catalytic project, right? I think a big piece of this, other than being just economic development and connecting to a lot of those mobility options I just talked about, it's also a huge piece of our regional identity, right? There's a regional identity element of Plan KCK. I think we have a lot of pride in our community, and I think we just haven't quite been able to figure out how that relates to our neighbors. And I think the Rock Island Bridge is an opportunity to do that. It's also brought housing, right? It also connects to a lot of historic resources like Cobb Point and the Heritage Trail. So again, strategic. Next is implementing Main Street. So historic preservation isn't only a way to protect and celebrate our history, but it's a mechanism to access a lot of economic development funding, right? It's a way that we can be more intentional and redevelop our downtown. It's a way to enhance arts and culture, support our small business ecosystem, of which, you know, makes up a huge portion of our economic development here. And it's also a smaller carbon footprint than just building new. One story I told on Monday when we were in front of Planning Commission is that I recently went to Philadelphia for a wedding. My fiance had never been there before. So what did we do? We went to see the Liberty Bell. We went to go see a demonstration of the printing press. We went to the Edgar Allan Poe house, right? It was heritage tourism. So what are those examples in KCK, right? Is that Quindaro Town Site? Is that the Ag Museum out west? is that, call point. What are those opportunities that when we get people here from out of town, like in 2026 for the World Cup, they can come and experience that kind of history here. Another piece, another strategic initiative, is about our internal systems. We know that we have a lot of different programs out there. Not all communicate with each other. We have an IT department that's, trying to manage all of this, but how can we improve those internal systems and align them so that we can provide better services for our residents? And then the last example, we know that the Wyandotte County Land Bank is the result of a lot of historic decisions that have impacted parts of our community for the worst, but it's also an opportunity, right? The land bank is an asset that we can use to do some of that intentional development that we can utilize to bring housing or green space or parks or whatever it is the community may need back into those neighborhoods. It's also something that can be partnered with a zero match brownfields program, right? How can we also, while redeveloping these land bank parcels, also address our contamination that we know is there from the lead and the asbestos that's buried underground? So in 2024, we're actually going to pilot this in the Douglas Sumner neighborhood. They've been working on a Douglas Sumner land bank strategy. And we're going to, again, pair that with a no match grant to see if we can redevelop a part of their strategy. So again, I said that these are only a few examples of the many, so you don't have to read this. I know the text is incredibly small, but we have quite a few in the plan. We have a few priorities that we put right up front. But I want to end on a different note. So if you've ever been to the Third Friday Art Walk, there is a resident there. His name is Dan Erickson. He does something called Poems While You Wait, which is, if you haven't done it before, you can walk up to him. He has a typewriter. You can ask him to write a poem about truly anything. When I walked up to him, he was writing a poem about Boogie the Pug. So truly anything. But I asked him to write a poem about what KCK would look like when it regenerates, right? Basically, what it would look like with something like PlanKCK. So I'm going to read that for you. So this is Fusion by Dan Erickson. This is a delicious place. I lick my lips walking these streets. The flavor of languages filling the air and laughter in all of them. We are unbland. We still know what neighbors are for, what it's like to create with friends. A time is coming when dreams are not luxuries, when skies will open for all of us. What dishes will open from our imaginations? What flowers will bloom in these sidewalk cracks? So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions? I have a question for you. Back to the slide. Develop a robust land bank
Yep, sure.
strategy. I'm just curious, can we just dive a little deeper there?
Sure.
First of all, is there a notion of when the updates are going to come forward to the commission from the subcommittee's work?
Mhm.
So that's question one. And then just talk to me more about the pilot with Douglas Sumner.
Sure.
If you're Gunnar Hand, Director of Planning and Design, if you're referring to the land bank policy update, I would refer that to Commissioner Davis. But I think what we encountered was a neighborhood who was already in the process of updating their quality of life plan, which is about 10 years old now. Douglas Sumner, as we know, is adjacent to downtown. It's in a very transit-rich environment. It also has at its core what is now, I think it was 6th last year, 10th this year, the 10th best public high school in the country. And so I think we have an incredible asset that we need to build around. That asset is surrounded by blocks of land bank property.
Yep.
And a community who has defined parcel by parcel what they expect from these land bank properties when they are redeveloped. So it was a natural sort of symbiotic convergence of the work that they were doing and the conversations we were having either at the land bank policy update through PlanKCK and with, urban regeneration in general. And so I think what we have is an opportunity when we go from land bank phase 1, which was really tearing down buildings and pushing them into basements, land bank phase 2, which is kind of where we feel like we are now. We've somehow created a market for these parcels, but we aren't moving the needle. 240 went out last year, 400 came in. So we're not, we need to do something more. And so we see phase 3 of the land bank as another opportunity and a kind of an example of moving this community towards community prosperity. And we can learn from the current RFP process when it comes to potentially batching larger portions of RFP land, of land bank land in an RFP to move it forward. So we're kind of learning as we're going. Implementation starts in day 1. I've said that a couple of times for our long range planning processes. And so we don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but we have this asset, a community that's ready for revitalization, and a potential method by which to do that. We think that that's another strategic initiative. Again, these are all examples. They're in the plan. They sort of came to the top as we were having these conversations as a way to illustrate some of the ideas of a North Star document like this. Most comprehensive plans don't really have action plans associated with them because we're supposed to take that vision and when we go into an area, really define those specific neighborhood plans and those area plans. But because our current comprehensive plan also functions as the area plan for many areas, some of those more detailed things started to rise to the top, and we felt it was important to share those in this document. I think I answered part of your question, maybe.
Yes, and it's very helpful. Commissioner Davis, please.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Davis, District 8. So an update on that, on the land bank policy review stuff. So the subcommittee work has ended. It's been a little over a month now since all of that has concluded. I'm currently working with the mayor's staff because they had some questions on some of the things that was recommended by the subcommittee. My hope is to have at least a draft with all of the mayor's staff edits out before the end of the year. That'll be us working with some of our new colleagues, but I don't foresee after that hurdle us having any other issues.
Okay, thank you very much. One thing I was thinking of after Monday night's neighborhood and community development meeting was that perhaps it fits into this component that we have an update maybe more often, I don't know, twice a year, once a year on the options. We did that pretty deep look at those when you were leading us through the whole land bank session. But maybe once a year, just have a look at the return that you're describing, how many options and how many of those have become reality, if you will, as in completed projects that are fully on the tax roll contributing. So that was just a thought I had after Monday night's neighborhood and community development meeting. So.
And if I may, just to explore land bank a little bit more. Obviously, we've had a lot of comprehensive conversations on many different subject areas, but one of them that keeps coming to the front when we talk about how we deliver city services is what the DA does with expungements and how they've packaged all the steps necessary to get an expungement into an event that makes it very accessible for residents to approach and then walk out of that single meeting with an expungement, as opposed to going all the way around the different courthouses and different departments to do it. Is there a way, and we've done this in the past for information for land bank, where we've gone out to the public and said, here's how you do a land bank, but is there a way we could craft a land bank summit type event where you walk in, learn how to do it and go through the process and maybe walk out as potentially on an agenda in the future, right? We can't necessarily give them the land bank in a single meeting, but is there a way? And I felt like land bank was a really interesting opportunity where we could think and potentially do something innovative like that with other programs across the UG.
Okay, so now you have me thinking, is there a way to package something like that before we get to the land bank? And this would again require that you lead some conversations among other departments such as delinquent real estate tax. So is there a way to package up a fair like that where I walk out and my house isn't in the tax sale anymore? Anyway, just you're making me think more about that because we heard a lot about that prior to the last tax sale as far as actual homeowners identified that could potentially lose their homes through the tax sale. So anyway, just it could extrapolate out to other topics.
Yeah.
So,
And again, if you use community prosperity as our
right,
North
exactly.
Star, there's a lot of things that can start to trickle down into actual real verifiable actions for us all to do.
Very interesting. Is other comments, questions from the commissioners? Okay. All right. Thank you, Alyssa. Really
you.
appreciate
Can
the,
I just make one quick comment?
of course.
So we get to the end of this process and we start to try to write a vision statement. And as we're trying to write this vision statement, we looked to your all's vision statement that you updated in 2022, which quite frankly is perfectly fitting for everything that we just went through for the last year. And so I think that's important to note that the priorities of this commission, as well as its vision statement that it updated, is the vision of this plan. After basically verifying that for the last year, we came back to it and you guys hit on it pretty well. And so we are always, I think we're all always talking about community prosperity. We just maybe didn't put a name to it. But I think that there's some synergy there that I just wanted to highlight, that we in a way started with and then came full circle to the vision statement you all had for the commission as the vision statement for that. Added community prosperity a little bit in there, but it was a interesting epiphany for us through the process. That's it.
Thank you. Thanks
Mhm.
for all the work.
Sure. Two other things before we go to the next agenda item. The Landmarks Commission recommended approval of the historic preservation component of PlanKCK at its hearing earlier this month. The City Planning Commission recommended approval of PlanKCK at their hearing earlier this week. It is for your consideration later this month on the 30th, and we'll take it from there.
Okay. Thank you. And now you'll move into the RFQ update for us.
Sure. All right, so again, Gunnar Hand, Director of Planning and Urban Design. I'm going to give you a quick update in regards to the RFP process that we've been undergoing for a little less than a year now in regards to UG owned properties. So originally last year, the previous CAO and mayor directed staff to develop redevelopment opportunities for these three sites. There was 18th and Quindaro Boulevard, which was specifically targeted for a grocery store. What was colloquially called the Triangle site, 4th in Minnesota, and then the old Indian Springs Mall, which has its own history of fits and starts and fits. So when we were directed to put something together for these three sites, we immediately recognized that we were going to have a bandwidth issue to put together some RFPs in the amount of time that the former CAO wanted us to get that going, which was early last spring. We looked to the bench contract with Development Strategies, who's an on-call for economic development, who has done these types of RFQ processes for many other cities. And when we sort of communicated how we wanted to put forward these three sites and what our desired outcomes were, their recommendation was to potentially take a step back from going straight into an RFP for each site and develop what's called a request for qualifications. So we did that process, namely because we felt that was a better mechanism to convey the type of local business participation we wanted out of this, and also the complexity of three sites all at once. So the RFQ process ended this past fall. We, as a part of that process, we developed a countywide market analysis. That market analysis has much greater utility than this RFP process. We used it to inform PlanKCK and the economic development strategy. We sent it to school districts and nonprofits and others who use growth projections in their planning as well. It's on the website right now for anybody who may want to use it. So that goes over not just population growth, but then translates that population growth into the amount of square feet per industrial, residential typologies, commercial and office. This included an engagement process. We've done one focused engagement, which I'll go into a little bit more detail here in a minute, for one of the sites. And we're right now at the RFP stage, moving forward. Now, the results of the RFQ were pretty interesting. We had no responses for 18th and Quindaro. So for the time being, we're moving forward with just the 4th and Minnesota and the Indian Springs site, both of which had 3 pre-qualified developers. There's 1 developer that pre-qualified for both sites, but we also pre-qualified 30 subcontractors, subconsultants. These are everything from the person who lays the asphalt to the people who design the buildings and everything in between. I'd say about a third of them are local KCK businesses. So I think that's a pretty good response considering the type of responses we typically get. And as we develop the RFP process, we think we're going to score teams higher if they bring in one of the pre-qualified contractors. That was sort of our thinking. So, because the Indian Springs site is a larger, more complicated, bigger animal, and because we wanted to keep the momentum going with this process, we are moving forward with the RFP for 4th Minnesota. On October 27th, we had the open house for this meeting. It was at the Merck, so it was just down the street from the site. We did a walking tour, gave a presentation, had a pretty engaging conversation with the public about what they want from that site, framing it in the downtown area plan and other long-range plans that have been developed. That following day on the 28th, we also had the neighborhood summit for PlanKCK and livable neighborhoods, and development strategies. The consultant we hired did some outreach for both this site at that location as well as the Indian Springs site. So with all of that background, we are in the process of creating the RFP right now. But what we heard at 4th and Minnesota can basically be broken down into these 4 categories. I think it's important to state now that we made it very clear at those meetings, and we are going to have made it clear, and we'll continue to make it clear that what the community desires for the site will certainly inform the evaluation criteria for the RFP, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to get 3 development proposals that are going to give us everything. It's going to boil down to whoever gets the closest wins, basically. And so I think while we've got a lot of ideas, and I'll put some of them up right now, how we make that a reasonable RFP, a reasonable request for proposals, and then what responses we get from those proposals are kind of 2 different things. So I think we got to keep, eyes wide open on this one and see how it all plays out. Hopefully we get it. But I think the core here is we believe this approach, instead of having a developer come into a site, explain what they want to do, and then work that out with the community, we've started with the community and our community asset, this public piece of public property, tried to define what our desired outcomes for the site, and then go find a developer at. They do that a lot in Europe, but they don't do that very much in the United States of America. So we really think this is an opportunity to redefine how we do community development in unified government. So we got a bunch of stuff that we've heard from the public. This is just a portion of it, not all of it, kind of the highlights, if you will. And we're trying to bake this into the RFP for this site right now. Our expectation is to release the request for proposals for the 4th and Minnesota site before the end of this calendar year. We hope to have our engagement regarding Indian Springs first quarter 2024, and potentially push out that RFP either in the first quarter or second quarter of 2024. Again, I think there's a premium on keeping things moving and providing and demonstrating progress to all of our pre-qualified lead developers who, we want to demonstrate that this is real to us, this is important to us, and we're doing everything to keep the ball rolling. We've had a couple of conversations about what this looks like after the RFP. And we baked it into the RFQ. We're going to bake it into the RFP as well for this, but the way we're thinking about it is not too dissimilar from potentially how we handle land bank, right? So if you become the lead developer chosen for the 4th and Minnesota site, you're going to get something that looks like an option agreement. They will then have to go through the regular entitlement process. I don't think they're going to, based on what is currently the land use and zoning for the 4th and Minnesota site, there might be a change of zone, but really I think it's going to come down to just a preliminary and final development plan, which is still an entitlement that has a public review process. We are pretty confident that that chosen developer will need some sort of incentives package. And so the development agreement process will be another part of this component. And then we get to eventually building permits and construction. Questions, comments, concerns?
Did I see a hand? Yes, Commissioner Burrows.
Thank you, Gunnar. I appreciate all the work you've put into this. I think it's important that we have a list of developers that are interested in economic development in our community. I, for one, will state I am extremely disappointed we're not getting interest in 18th Quindaro with all the discussion that this commission and this community has had in reference to the Quindaro ruins and the trailheads that would be taking us all the way around, hopefully along the riverfront. It's kind of disappointing, but the pre-qualified developers for 4th and Minnesota and Indian Springs, is there a reason why we're not advancing them together versus just doing 4th and Minnesota first and then 5-6 months later doing Indian Springs if we have them at the table?
Sure. So again, there's only one developer that's common between the two of them, and that might be actually a reason to go faster than slower, as you just asked. But one is potentially a capacity issue from staff. We were the same consultant who's helping us with the RFP was integrally involved in PlanKCK. So we have quickly pivoted from finalizing that draft document for your review to getting them to start writing the RFP for 4th and Minnesota. They're going to use the template of that to develop Indian Springs. But I think the number one reason I think we've had it, we're not doing them at the same time is we still have quite a few conversations to have with the KCATA as it relates to their transit center. We've started some of those. In the RFQ, we noted a couple of potential consolidations of UG facilities on that site that we still need to talk through. There's a couple of environmental factors, namely the spring, which Indian Springs is named for, that we have to kind of think through and how we're going to address that. And it's just a much bigger site. So there's a couple conversations. We didn't feel prepared to write the RFP quite yet, and we're in the process of having those right now. And so while we would have liked to do it all faster, we were delayed this past summer. And so we're doing everything we can to push these out. As it relates to 18th and Quindaro, in some of the post RFQ conversations that we have had, it became very clear that number one it was a land assemblage issue. The southeast corner of 18th Quindaro certainly has a lot of land bank properties, but it also has a lot of privately owned lots that are vacant still. And there's a couple of houses there as well that we would have to either acquire, buy out, eminent domain, what have you. And I don't think the development community had an appetite to do that type of land assemblage, whereas 4th and Minnesota Indian Springs are ready to go parcels, basically. The other thing is that we were told was it's basic math. They look at household income and they look at number of rooftops, and they're just not there at 18th and Quindaro. And we specifically said it has to be a grocery store. And when they did their, back and napkin sketches, what we heard from them was there's no market here to build a grocery store at this location currently.
Okay. Thank you. And Gunnar, I can appreciate that. It's just disappointing that we have an area of our community that has cried out for, I know, at least a decade or more. And we could throw every opportunity at an area in our community. It just kind of fascinates me to think that the cost of ground in our community. I mean, we can almost give the ground away and still not have an interest in an area of our community. And it just disappoints me tremendously for that area of our community, but also it seems like it's shortchanging a part of our community, and it challenges us. But in reference to Fourth and Minnesota, is there a tax base there presently?
Is there a what?
A tax base? Is there development at Fourth and Minnesota already?
Most of them are either nonprofits. You got DCF over there. You have the HUD offices across the street on State. You have the Children's Campus and then KU Med. So not really.
Okay, so we have no revenue generation there. And the same way with Indian Springs, basically outside of income tax.
I mean, what we've heard from the public and what the downtown area plan says for that site specifically, this is an opportunity for a landmark project, gateway project, skyline altering project in downtown KCK. So I think that, any type of mixed use project would be a potential boon for that immediate area. I think there's a lot of other connectivity issues that site provide us. All those trailheads that Alyssa explained in the meeting are right underneath that spaghetti intersection, just waiting for some sort of connection. And so I think if we can move this forward, if we can get a development going, there are immediate sites. There's that retail site on the other side of State and Fifth, and then another parcel on the Washington Avenue side right there at Fifth. I mean, those would be potentially ripe for reinvestment, redevelopment, if we can have a proof of concept. I think one of the biggest issues downtown KCK is facing is we got a lot of projects in the mix. A lot of them got shut down during the pandemic. We don't have a single one that's completed to be a proof of concept. And so no one wants to be that first developer. We have a lot of people trying to get it. So I think that if we can get one of those completed and prove the concept, I think we can start to see a momentum change in downtown KCK.
And I wouldn't disagree with that. And I think in one of the previous brochure that you showed us, PlanKCK, we talked about State Avenue and then maybe moving it, or downtown, and then moving it over to Central Avenue, complete streets, Main Street. And that concept, I mean, we if we could combine the two of them presently, I think it would be just awesome to be able to do that, because they both have something that the other one needs.
Yeah.
And if there was a way to do are we missing out by not investing in Central Avenue first versus downtown Minnesota Avenue, because we have a lot of not-for-profits occupying space down here. We do have interest coming in, but yet we already have a micro business sector that would allow us to do a complete street revitalization down Central Avenue that would create that early connectivity for the Central Avenue Bridge and the trailheads, and that would allow people to come over and already engage in a lot of the small businesses and the ethnic inclusion they could have through Central Avenue.
I think it's our expectation that the Main Street program will spread across this community. As you all know, Kansas City, Kansas is a collection of small downtowns, small neighborhood centers, many of which were their own incorporated cities at one point.
Sure.
And so we started with downtown simply because they expressed interest in pursuing the project, for lack of a better term, first. So we went that way. That NBR approached us about that opportunity. We had a connection to Kansas Main Street, and so we made those connections for them. We fully expect to branch out from there and look at the other main streets, if you will, across KCK. And yes, I think the way that we wrote it in PlanKCK said start with downtown because we're working with downtown right now. That is not meant to say downtown's more of a priority than any of these commercial corridors. It's just that's the one we were in the middle of right now. So we put that in there, and then how we move forward, whether it be with the Argentine Betterment Association or Rosedale on Rainbow Boulevard or whatever it is, I think that we're excited about that opportunity. There are no Kansas Main Street programs in Wyandotte County today. And so getting one started is the first step. Getting a bunch of them, I think what we've heard from Kansas Main Street is they're pretty excited to work with Wyandotte County.
Well, that's good news. I know as a complete street graduate, I think it's imperative that if we have synergy somewhere,
Mhm.
that we lock into that synergy. We've seen what's happened with Strawberry Hill and the revitalization and the renewal and reinvestment in Strawberry Hill. And to bring that connectivity now that we talk about in with what the synergy of Central Avenue is doing, the cultural fairs that they're having and the immersion into that culture, that there's a synergy there. And I just kind of wonder what would occur if we partnered with that location even more
Yeah.
to help boost that, because with
Well,
that.
and there's already a synergistic relationship between CABA and the downtown shareholders anyway. So I think
Yeah.
that's a natural
Right.
progression.
Sure. Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Gunnar.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Commissioner Davis.
Thank you. Kind of going back to the Quindaro conversation, were there other options offered outside of just a traditional grocery store for that site? Or was the message to developers either tell us you can do a grocery store here or not? What was just that communication?
So the direction from the former CAO and mayor was grocery store, grocery store, grocery store. And so we wrote the RFQ for as it relates to that site specifically to, are you qualified to build a grocery store at a location like this? And obviously we got no interest. I mentioned land assemblage, I mentioned rooftops. There's other initiatives. Kitty corner from this site is the Northeast Grocers, which
I
is
was
the
gonna bring that
community's effort to create its own co-op in a food desert. So I don't know if that's necessarily competition, but
Sure.
there's a couple of folks who expressed interest in more grocery stores in this location, and they just haven't materialized yet. So
Yeah, I don't know. I wonder what would have happened if we would have said top priorities grocery store, but if you can do something with it to turn it into productive use, I just wonder if we get more than zero for
Yeah. And I don't think we've
submittals.
given up on 18 Quindaro or Quindaro
Sure.
Boulevard at all. I think we just wanted to make sure that we kept moving forward with the RFQ, RFP process and potentially circle back. But I think lesson learned there would be maybe we were too specific, at least at that stage, to draw any interest. And I think that there's arguably that would have been a catalytic project, right? But I think there's arguably a broader strategy along the entire Quindaro Boulevard and transforming it into, our Black Wall Street, if you will. Historically, our Black Wall Street was actually Fifth Street, but that's, that's where we are today is Quindaro Boulevard is the primary commercial corridor in the Northeast. So.
Yeah. Moving on to Indian Springs, I'm glad that there's some kind of movement. I was worried because in our slide, you said what we were given was second quarter, the release of Indian Springs RFP and pre-bid. So I'm glad that at least on the slide that was presented to the public, it's all in first quarter. I absolutely understanding staff capacity regarding that project for sure. I know our community and kind of willing. I actually did a town hall on this before any of this stuff, right? Really got started. And so I'd be more than happy to help with any community engagement on this or any type of support, just so we can get some things moving. It would be great if by like mid-spring, we could really say there's movement for both sides.
Sure.
And an idea, a concept can be presented to the
Well,
public.
and as the CEO, retools the economic development department and those strategic hires that you all put into the budget for 2024 start to come online, I think that should move this specific initiative on a little bit faster. In the situation that we're in today, I'm kind of wearing 1.5 hats.
Sure.
And doing the best I can.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you for the work that y'all have done. It's been very impressive.
Thank you, Commissioner. Administrator Johnston.
Thank you. Regarding Quindaro, I had a couple conversations over the last couple of weeks with the mayor, and his he realizes the weakness of the previous RFP, and we're going to be working toward issuing one that is more general and not specific toward one entity. I think what Gunnar has said is something that I don't think many people want to hear, is that developers, investors look for return on their investment. And when they do that, one of the major things they look at is the socioeconomic and demographic profile of a community. And what we may want, what the citizens may want, when they go through that internal assessment, they're saying things like Gunnar said earlier, an area may not have the disposable income at a level that would be spent and make that venture successful. And I think that's one of the realities that we have to accept if we look at various areas of our community and ask ourselves, why aren't investors knocking on our door? There's a reason why they're not knocking on their door, is they're not seeing in their personal assessment a return on investment, and that doesn't match what we think would be great. So that's where I think as we move forward, there's got to be a closer working relationship with the development community, significant community education on what is economic development and what helps bring success in economic development in the area, because there are so many issues. And when I've talked with site selectors in my career, when they come to a community for a client, they are coming with you're competing with many different communities. And in the first review, they're looking for the no, because there'll be communities that have more yeses. And remember, they're working for your client, not for your community. And so if they're looking for a successful project for a community, they got their evaluation processes. And right now, many areas of our community who are starving for reinvestment aren't getting it because it's not meeting the ROI. And I think on top of that, we have the cost of investment and development with interest rates and inflation right now. So I think what we'll see in the next year is a significant community education on what is successful economic development, because one of the things that I think is very important is that we try to erase ignorance as a defense and bring in enlightenment and awareness. And then that opens the door for maybe we need to do some changes, attitude, approaches to development in certain different areas, because there is a newfound understanding of what it's all about. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you very much. Other comments or questions on this presentation? Which I do really appreciate, again, how busy you stay and how busy you've been, especially during 2023. The 4th in Minnesota, we're hoping that RFP is out on the street by the end of the year, right?
That's correct.
And then how long is that window open for a period of time? What's the time frame?
Sorry, Gunnar Hand, Director of Planning and Design. The typical period of opening is about 30 days, but because we're at the holidays, we're probably just going to extend that to more like 60 days. Nobody wants to put together a response for an RFP the day after Christmas or the day after New Year's. So I think we are going to try to get it out on the street as soon as possible, potentially even end of November. At least that's our target goal. It'll probably slide into December just a little bit, but I am reviewing the draft of the RFP right now.
Okay.
And we'll get that draft after I get my first blush to the administrator as soon as possible. But yeah, it'll probably be a 60-day period sometime late November, early December. We're going to try to we'll probably have the pre-bid conference which is why we might need to scoot it back a little bit because we're talking about at least a 2 week notice for said pre-bid conference. And so we're going to try to have a pre-bid conference sometime before the end of the calendar year and then immediately release the RFP shortly thereafter. Procurement's on a Thursday schedule just because that's when it goes out in the echo. So it'll get released on some Thursday as soon as possible.
Okay, and then I know you said based on the community engagement that occurred around that particular site. So some of those things are going to inform the RFP, I'm assuming.
Yes, I think the desired outcomes, community betterments or benefits will be a part of the evaluation criteria. I think, again, it's this balancing act of how much is the value of that property versus what we're asking. And we got to figure out a way to balance that, or we're going to get none of our pre-qualified developers to respond to that RFP if we ask for too much. So we're working through that. And, you know, I mentioned sort of a landmark tower and opportunity on the 4th Minnesota side. I think the real value we have is the view. You
Right.
go tall, we're going to get a lot of units that are going to be potentially worth more than that land. And I think so we got to figure out what that value is and then try to find a reasonable RFP.
Just a curious comment, because in Chair Burrow's committee is a draft community benefits agreement resolution working its way toward December. So I guess I have to assume that the RFP would include, if that were to pass, any potential developer would have to be aware.
We have a
That-
placeholder in the RFP to see
Okay.
when and where that goes. So it's either going to say is potentially happening or just was adopted.
Okay,
Yeah, we're tracking that.
Commissioner Davis.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just add, whatever we can do to get the meetings for Indian Springs going, the sooner the better. I'm just hearing that developers are kind of ready to go. And I also know that we're going to be looking at that January, February timeline. So I would recommend hybrid, or if you're going to do an in-person, do an online version as well, just because typically around that time, a lot of our neighborhood groups and other folks, they're not meeting.
Hmm.
And so I would hate for them to be at a disadvantage because of the time that we took to do community engagement. With that being said, we need to do community engagement and then get on with that RFP as best as possible. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you.
Anything else? Okay. All right. Thank you again very much to you
Thanks for
and
your
your
time.
team. With that, if there are no further comments or questions, we will adjourn this meeting and we will reconvene in the chambers at 7 for our regular full commission meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Markley, so moved.
Davis, second.
Thank you very much. Roll call, clerk.
Roll call, Bynum,
Aye.
Burrows.
Aye.
McKiernan,
Aye.
Markley,
Aye.
Stites,
Aye.
Davis.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much. We're adjourned.